Chosen one, there were moments when you truly believed the weight on your chest would never lift, when every breath felt heavier than the last, when silence around you was louder than any noise, and in those moments you asked the question that echoes in the hearts of all who walk a path they never asked for: why me? Why this pain? Why this isolation? Why this constant pressure that never seems to ease no matter how strong you try to be? You watched others move through life with ease while you carried storms inside your ribs, storms no one could see, storms you couldn't explain, storms that shaped you in ways you didn't understand at the time. And what hurt the most was not just the suffering itself, but the feeling that it had no meaning, that it was random, unfair, and endless. But what if the very thing that tried to break you was the same force that was building you? What if every tear you wiped away in silence was not wasted, but counted? What if every night you spent questioning your worth was actually carving depth into your spirit that comfort never could? Because the truth is, chosen ones are not shaped in peace. They are formed in pressure, they are refined in confusion, they are awakened through loss. Your suffering was never punishment, it was preparation. Every time life stripped something away from you, it was not emptying you, it was making space. Every disappointment forced you inward, every betrayal sharpened your awareness, every rejection redirected your path, every period of loneliness taught you how to stand without leaning on what could disappear, and slowly, almost invisibly, something inside you began to change. You became more observant, more resilient, more aware of energy, intentions, and truth. Pain has a way of removing illusions, and illusions cannot survive in the presence of someone being prepared for purpose. Think about how many times you were pushed to your limit, convinced you couldn't endure another moment, yet somehow you did. You stood up again. You breathed again. You kept moving forward even when your heart felt shattered. That strength did not come from nowhere. It was forged through repeated trials, through moments when giving up felt easier than continuing. Yet something deeper within you refused to surrender. That something is not accidental. It is the mark of someone being shaped for more than ordinary living, because ordinary paths do not require extraordinary endurance. Ordinary lives do not demand repeated transformation. Ordinary souls are not taken apart and rebuilt again and again. But you were, and each time you emerged slightly different, wiser, quieter, deeper, stronger. Your suffering trained you to see what others overlook. It taught you empathy that cannot be faked. It gave you the ability to recognize pain in others without words. It sharpened your perception of truth beyond appearances. These are not random side effects of hardship. They are tools. Tools given only to those who will one day use them for something greater than themselves. There were seasons when everything felt dark, when nothing made sense, when the world felt distant and cold. Those seasons were not empty. They were sacred spaces of transformation. Just because growth is invisible does not mean it is not happening. Seeds break open underground before anyone sees green above the surface, and breaking open always looks like destruction before it looks like growth. You thought you were falling apart, but in reality, you were breaking open to become someone who could hold more light, more understanding, more purpose. Pain expands capacity. It stretches the soul beyond comfort, beyond limitation, beyond who you used to be. And the more you endured, the more your capacity grew. That is why the things that once devastated you no longer shake you the same way. That is why challenges that would overwhelm others feel familiar to you. You have been trained in storms. You have learned to stand in uncertainty. You have developed endurance that cannot be taught through ease. Nothing you went through was wasted. Not the nights of confusion, not the heartbreak that changed how you trust, not the loneliness that forced you to know yourself, not the moments when you felt unseen, unheard, forgotten. Those moments were shaping your independence from external validation. They were teaching you to anchor yourself within, not outside. Because someone with a higher calling cannot rely on temporary approval. They must stand firm even when misunderstood. They must continue even when unsupported. They must trust even when evidence is unclear. And suffering builds that kind of inner foundation. It strips away the need for constant reassurance. It replaces dependence with inner knowing. It transforms fragility into resilience. You may have wondered why your path seemed harder than others, why your lessons were heavier, why your growth demanded so much discomfort. The answer is simple, though not always easy to accept. Your life was never meant to remain small. Expansion requires pressure. Awakening requires disruption. Transformation requires release. Comfort maintains who you are. Difficulty changes who you become, and you were meant to become someone who could carry meaning, insight, and strength that only experience can produce. Your suffering gave you depth, and depth is what allows you to understand life beyond surface appearances. It gave you awareness, and awareness is what allows you to see truth where others see illusion. It gave you endurance, and endurance is what allows you to continue when others stop. These are not random traits. They are qualities formed intentionally through lived experience. Even the moments that felt like abandonment had purpose. They taught you self-reliance. They revealed your inner voice. They forced you to discover strength that external support would have hidden. And now, when challenges arise, you don't collapse the way you once did. You pause. You observe. You adapt. You endure. That is transformation in motion. You were not meant to remain who you were before the suffering began. The pain was not an interruption of your path. It was the path. Every challenge carved direction. Every hardship refined identity. Every loss revealed what truly matters, and slowly, step by step, you became someone who can handle responsibility that once would have overwhelmed you. Someone who can carry insight that once would have confused you. Someone who can stand in truth even when standing alone. Your suffering gave you clarity, and clarity is one of the rarest forms of power. Because when you see clearly, you cannot be easily manipulated. When you understand deeply, you cannot be easily shaken. When you have endured greatly, you cannot be easily broken. The very experiences that once made you question your strength are the same experiences that proved it. And one day, you will look back and realize something that may feel almost impossible right now. The pain you wished away was the same force that shaped the person you needed to become. Without it, you would not see the way you see. You would not understand the way you understand. You would not feel the depth of compassion, awareness, and resilience that now lives within you. Your suffering carried a higher purpose because it was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to reveal you. It was meant to uncover strength hidden beneath comfort. It was meant to awaken awareness buried beneath distraction. It was meant to transform potential into reality. And though the process felt cruel at times, though the lessons felt relentless, though the weight felt unbearable, you are still here, still breathing, still growing, still becoming. That alone is proof that what you endured was not meaningless. It was movement, it was shaping, it was preparation. And if you listen closely to the quiet strength inside you now, the calm that exists where chaos once lived, you will begin to understand the truth that was hidden in every painful moment. You were never being punished, you were being prepared. And there comes a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you begin to notice that the pain that once consumed you no longer defines you in the same way. It is still part of your story, but it is no longer your prison. Something inside you has shifted. You start seeing patterns where before you saw chaos. You start recognizing lessons where before you saw only loss. And slowly, you begin to understand that suffering was never just something you survived, it was something that awakened you. Because awakening rarely feels gentle. It feels like confusion, like pressure, like everything familiar dissolving at once. It feels like standing in the middle of your own life and realizing you cannot go back to who you were, but you also don't fully know who you are becoming. That in-between space is where chosen ones are truly shaped, not when life is clear, but when it is uncertain. Not when everything makes sense, but when nothing does. That uncertainty forces awareness. It forces reflection. It forces growth that comfort would never demand. You may remember the phase when you started questioning everything, people, situations, beliefs, even yourself. Things that once felt normal suddenly felt heavy or misaligned. Conversations that once felt easy began to feel empty. Environments that once felt familiar started to feel draining. It was confusing, maybe even frightening, because it felt like you were losing connection with the world around you. But what was really happening was refinement. Your awareness was sharpening. Your energy was becoming more sensitive to truth and falsehood. When suffering strips away illusions, you cannot pretend anymore. You cannot ignore what feels wrong. You cannot stay where your spirit feels confined. And that realization often creates distance from places, from patterns, from people who only fit the version of you that existed before your transformation began. That distance is not punishment, it is alignment. When you are being prepared for something greater, what no longer serves you must fall away. And sometimes what falls away are things you once believed you could never live without. That is why the journey can feel lonely. Growth often separates before it reconnects. Transformation often isolates before it reveals purpose. You are not being removed from life, you are being repositioned within it. But repositioning feels like loss when you do not yet see where you are being placed. And so you walk through seasons where everything feels quiet, unfamiliar, and uncertain. Yet those are the very seasons where your inner world becomes stronger than your outer circumstances. During those silent periods, you learn something many people never learn: how to sit with yourself. No distractions, no constant noise. Just you and your thoughts, your emotions, your truth. At first, that silence felt uncomfortable. It forced you to face wounds you had ignored. It revealed fears you had buried. It exposed questions you had avoided asking. But over time, that same silence became strength. You began to understand your own mind. You began to hear your own intuition. You began to recognize the difference between external pressure and internal guidance. And once that awareness awakens, it cannot be turned off. You start moving differently, choosing differently, seeing differently, not because you are trying to be different, but because you cannot unknow what you now know. This is one of the hidden purposes of suffering. It removes autopilot. It forces conscious living. When life is easy, people drift. They follow routines, expectations, and habits without questioning whether those things truly align with who they are. But suffering interrupts that drift. It demands attention. It demands meaning. It demands transformation. And through that demand, you begin to live intentionally rather than automatically. You begin to ask deeper questions. What truly matters? What is real? What is worth my energy? What kind of life reflects who I have become? These questions are not comfortable, but they are powerful. They reshape direction. They refine purpose. They guide you toward authenticity rather than imitation. And authenticity is something suffering protects fiercely, because once you have endured enough pain, you no longer want to live a life that feels false. You no longer want connections that feel shallow. You no longer want goals that feel empty. Your tolerance for illusion decreases. Your desire for truth increases. And that shift changes everything. It changes how you respond to challenges. It changes how you value time. It changes how you see yourself. You stop measuring your worth by external standards and begin recognizing strength that cannot be seen but has been earned through experience. You realize that survival itself required courage. That endurance itself required resilience. That continuing forward even when exhausted required strength many people never have to develop. And then something even more profound begins to happen. Compassion deepens. Not the surface-level kindness that comes from politeness, but the deep, quiet compassion that comes from understanding pain firsthand. When you have suffered, you recognize suffering in others without explanation. You see it in their eyes, in their silence, in the way they carry themselves. And because you know what it feels like to struggle unseen, you respond differently. You listen more carefully. You judge less quickly. You understand more deeply. Your suffering expands your emotional capacity. It makes your heart stronger, not weaker. Because true strength is not hardness. It is the ability to remain open despite having been hurt. This is why your experiences were never just about you. They were preparing you to hold space for others, to understand what cannot be taught through words alone. Wisdom gained through comfort is theoretical. Wisdom gained through suffering is lived. It carries weight. It carries depth. It carries truth that resonates beyond explanation. One day, whether you realize it or not, someone will look at you and feel safe simply because you understand what struggle feels like. Your presence will comfort without effort because your strength was forged in reality, not imagination. But before that purpose becomes clear, there is always a phase where everything feels uncertain. A phase where you wonder if all the pain actually led anywhere. A phase where growth feels invisible. This is one of the hardest parts of the journey, trusting transformation you cannot yet see. Just because something is forming does not mean it is visible. Just because direction is unclear does not mean you are lost. Sometimes progress is internal long before it becomes external. Sometimes the greatest changes are happening beneath the surface, quietly restructuring who you are before revealing what you will do. And this is where many people misunderstand suffering. They believe its purpose is only endurance, to survive and move on. But for those walking a higher path, suffering is not just endured, it is integrated. It becomes part of your awareness, part of your perspective, part of your strength. It does not disappear. It transforms into insight, into intuition, into clarity about what matters and what does not, into the ability to remain steady even when life becomes unpredictable again. Because life will always bring challenges. But now you are different. You are not the same person who first entered the storm. You carry knowledge that cannot be removed. You carry resilience that cannot be undone. You carry awareness that cannot be dimmed. And most importantly, you carry proof that you can endure more than you once believed possible. That proof changes how you face the future. Fear loses some of its power when you know you have already survived what once felt unbearable. And this is when the deeper meaning of your suffering begins to reveal itself, not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually through realization after realization. You start seeing how each painful experience shaped a specific strength, how each loss created a specific awareness, how each challenge built a specific capacity within you. Nothing was random. Nothing was wasted. Even the moments that felt senseless were shaping something essential. Your suffering was not simply something that happened to you, it was something that formed you into someone capable of living with depth, clarity, resilience, and purpose. And as this realization settles into your awareness, something remarkable happens. You stop asking only, "Why did this happen to me?" and begin asking, "What did this create within me?" That shift in perspective is powerful. It transforms pain from something meaningless into something purposeful. It transforms wounds into wisdom. It transforms survival into transformation. And once that understanding takes root, you begin to see your life not as a series of hardships, but as a process of preparation. Preparation for a life that requires strength, awareness, and depth beyond the ordinary. A life that only someone who has walked through darkness could fully step into. There is another stage in this journey that very few people talk about, and it is the stage where you begin to realize that your suffering didn't just make you stronger, it changed what you are willing to tolerate. Things that once seemed normal now feel unbearable. Disrespect that you once ignored now feels heavy. Environments that once felt acceptable now feel suffocating. It is not that life suddenly became harder, it is that you became more aware, and awareness changes everything. When your spirit has been refined through pain, it cannot comfortably exist in places that deny truth, growth, or authenticity. This is why many chosen ones go through a period where they feel completely out of place, even in spaces they once belonged to. It can feel confusing, even isolating, because you are no longer who you were, but the world around you may still expect you to be that person. This is where the deeper separation begins, not separation as rejection, but separation as refinement. You begin to notice that some connections were built around survival versions of you, not your awakened self. Some relationships were formed when you were still seeking validation, still shrinking your truth, still accepting less than you deserved simply to feel accepted. But suffering changed that. Pain has a way of teaching self-respect in a language that cannot be misunderstood. When you have endured enough hardship, you no longer want to carry unnecessary weight. You no longer want to perform roles that drain your spirit. You no longer want to silence your inner voice to maintain external peace. And so naturally your world begins to shift. People may not understand this shift. Some may say you have changed too much. Others may feel uncomfortable around your new boundaries. Some may even pull away because they the depth you now carry. And for a moment, this can feel like loss all over again. But this stage is different. This is not loss that weakens you. This is release that strengthens you. You are not being stripped of connection. You are being aligned with truth. And alignment often requires letting go of what was built on versions of you that no longer exist. One of the hardest realizations during this phase is understanding that growth is not always celebrated. Sometimes it is misunderstood. Sometimes it is resisted. Sometimes it makes others uncomfortable because your transformation reflects changes they are not ready to make themselves. But your journey was never meant to be validated by everyone. The path of deep transformation is often quiet, personal, and unseen. It unfolds internally long before it becomes visible externally. And because of that, there will be times when you feel like you are walking alone, not because you are abandoned, but because you are walking ahead of what others currently understand. This is also the stage where purpose begins to whisper more clearly. Not in loud, dramatic revelations, but in subtle feelings, persistent nudges, quiet clarity about what matters to you now. You begin to feel drawn toward meaning rather than distraction, toward depth rather than surface, toward authenticity rather than performance. The things that energize you begin to change. The things that drain you become obvious, and slowly your direction begins to form, not as a fixed plan, but as an inner knowing of what aligns and what does not. But here is the challenge. Clarity does not remove difficulty. Even when you begin sensing your purpose, the path toward it often requires courage you are still learning to trust, because stepping into alignment means leaving behind what is familiar. It means choosing growth over comfort repeatedly. It means trusting the strength your suffering built, even when your mind still remembers what it felt like to be fragile. This is where many chosen ones hesitate, not because they lack strength, but because they remember too clearly what pain feels like. Yet the truth is, the strength you gained was not temporary. It is not fragile. It is part of who you are now. Your suffering trained you for uncertainty. It prepared you for moments where outcomes are unclear. It built resilience that allows you to move forward even without guarantees. And purpose often requires exactly that: movement without full visibility, trust without complete understanding, action without absolute certainty. Not because you are reckless, but because you have learned that growth always unfolds beyond the edges of comfort. Another profound shift that happens in this stage is your relationship with fear. Fear does not disappear, but it changes. It no longer controls you the way it once did. You begin to recognize it as a signal, not a command. You feel it, but you are not ruled by it. Because when you have already survived deep emotional storms, the fear of future storms loses some of its power. You know what it means to endure. You know what it means to rebuild. You know that even when things fall apart, something within you remains steady. That inner stability is one of the greatest gifts suffering gives. The understanding that external chaos does not have to equal internal collapse. And as this stability grows, so does your sense of responsibility. Not in a heavy or overwhelming way, but in a quiet awareness that your experiences have meaning beyond personal survival. You begin to feel that what you have learned, what you have endured, carries value that extends beyond your own life. Maybe it shows in how you support others. Maybe it shows in how you speak truth when others remain silent. Maybe it shows in the way you create, lead, guide, or simply exist with authenticity that gives others permission to do the same. Whatever form it takes, the realization slowly emerges: your suffering equipped you with something that can serve more than just you. This is when pain begins to transform fully into purpose, not because the past disappears, but because it becomes integrated into who you are becoming. Your experiences turn into insight. Your wounds turn into wisdom. Your endurance turns into quiet strength that influences everything you do. And the most remarkable part is that this transformation often happens so gradually that you don't notice its full magnitude until you look back and see how far you've come. Think about who you were before the hardest moments of your life. Think about how you responded to difficulty, how you saw yourself, how you understood the world. Now think about who you are today. The difference is not small, it is profound. Your perspective is deeper, your awareness is sharper, your resilience is stronger, your priorities are clearer. That transformation did not happen randomly. It was shaped moment by moment through everything you endured. And yet, even with all this growth, there may still be days when you feel tired. Days when the weight of everything you have carried feels heavy again. Days when you wish the path had been easier. And those feelings are human. Strength does not mean the absence of exhaustion. Growth does not erase vulnerability. Being prepared for purpose does not mean you never feel overwhelmed. It simply means that even when you feel those things, you do not stay there permanently. You recover, you recalibrate, you continue, because deep down something within you understands that your journey is still unfolding. The suffering you endured was not the final chapter, it was the foundation. Everything it built within you is now part of what will shape what comes next. And though the full picture may not yet be visible, the direction is forming, the strength is established, the awareness is awake, the resilience is real. You are no longer just someone who survived pain. You are someone who has been shaped by it, refined by it, strengthened by it, and prepared through it. And whether you fully see it yet or not, everything you endured has positioned you for a life that requires depth, courage, and authenticity. A life that only someone who has walked through fire and remained standing could truly live. And then comes the stage where everything you have endured, everything you have questioned, everything you have survived begins to settle into a quiet, undeniable realization. You are not the same person who once wondered if you would make it through. The storms that once felt endless no longer feel like enemies. They feel like teachers you have already learned from. The pain that once felt like chaos now begins to reveal structure. The confusion that once overwhelmed you begins to make sense in ways that are calm, steady, and deeply grounding. This is the moment when your suffering stops feeling like something that happened in the past and starts feeling like something that lives within you as strength. Not loud strength, not forceful strength, but quiet, unshakable strength that does not need to prove itself because it already knows what it has survived. You begin to see your life differently, not as a series of wounds, but as a process of becoming. Every moment that once felt meaningless begins connecting like pieces of a design you could not see before. The delays that frustrated you protected you. The endings that broke you redirected you. The loneliness that drained you introduced you to yourself. The struggles that exhausted you strengthened parts of your spirit that comfort could never reach. And slowly, gently, a deep understanding forms within you. Nothing was random, nothing was wasted, nothing was without purpose. This realization changes how you carry your past. Instead of seeing it as something heavy you must drag behind you, it becomes something solid beneath your feet. Your experiences become your foundation. They hold you steady. They remind you of your capacity. They remind you that even when life felt unbearable, you endured. Even when you thought you were breaking, you were transforming. Even when everything seemed uncertain, you were being guided through a process that required you to release who you were so you could become who you were meant to be. And once you truly accept this, something inside you becomes peaceful in a way that is difficult to explain. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you no longer resist your journey. You stop asking why everything had to be so hard, and you begin trusting that what shaped you also strengthened you for what lies ahead. Resistance turns into acceptance, confusion turns into clarity, fear turns into readiness. And readiness is powerful, because it means you are no longer living just to survive, you are living to step fully into who you have become. You may begin to notice that you move through the world differently now. You react less impulsively. You observe more deeply. You listen more carefully, not just to others, but to yourself. You no longer rush to fill silence because you understand the value of stillness. You no longer chase validation because you understand your worth was built through experience, not approval. You no longer fear being alone because you discovered that solitude once strengthened you when nothing else could. This is what transformation looks like when it has fully settled into your being. It does not announce itself loudly. It shows up in quiet confidence, in calm decisions, in boundaries that do not need explanation, in peace that does not depend on external circumstances. It shows up in the way you handle uncertainty, not with panic, but with grounded awareness that you have faced difficulty before and found your way through it. And perhaps the most powerful shift of all is how you begin to see the future. Before, the future may have felt intimidating, unpredictable, overwhelming. But now, even though uncertainty still exists, it does not feel threatening in the same way. Because you understand something deeply, whatever comes, you have the capacity to face it. Your past already proved that. The evidence lives inside you. You are not guessing about your strength anymore, you have lived it. This awareness creates courage, but not reckless courage. It creates steady courage, the kind that allows you to move forward even when the path is not fully visible. The kind that allows you to trust timing you cannot control. The kind that allows you to remain grounded when everything around you shifts. Because your foundation is no longer external, it is internal, built slowly, painfully, intentionally through every moment of suffering that once felt unbearable. And now you begin to understand the deepest truth of all. Your suffering was not just preparation for something you will do, it was preparation for who you would become. Because before you can live with purpose, you must become someone capable of carrying it. Purpose requires strength, it requires awareness, it requires emotional depth, it requires resilience that cannot be shaken by temporary setbacks. And suffering builds all of these things in ways nothing else can. That is why your journey could not be shallow. That is why your lessons could not be light. That is why your transformation had to be deep. You were never meant to remain unchanged. You were meant to be shaped into someone who understands life beyond surface appearances. Someone who recognizes meaning where others see randomness. Someone who stands steady where others collapse. Someone who carries wisdom not because they studied it, but because they lived it. And when you fully embrace this truth, something remarkable happens. Gratitude begins to exist alongside the memory of pain. Not gratitude for suffering itself, but gratitude for what it created within you. Gratitude for the strength you discovered. Gratitude for the awareness you gained. Gratitude for the resilience that now defines how you move through life. Gratitude for the version of yourself that could only exist because you endured what you once believed you could not survive. This is the completion of the transformation, when you no longer see yourself as someone who was broken by hardship, but as someone who was built through it, someone refined, strengthened, and awakened by experiences that carried a purpose far greater than momentary comfort. Someone who understands that their journey was never about avoiding pain. It was about becoming powerful enough, aware enough, and strong enough to live with depth, meaning and truth. And from this place, your life moves forward with a different kind of energy, not rushed, not forced, but intentional, grounded, aligned. You no longer need to search desperately for purpose, because you realize purpose is already unfolding through who you have become. Every insight you carry, every strength you embody, every moment of resilience you demonstrate, these are all expressions of the higher meaning your suffering was shaping all along. You were never just surviving hardship. You were being prepared to live with depth most people never reach. You were being shaped to understand life in a way that cannot be taught through comfort alone. You were being strengthened to stand steady in moments that would shake others. You were being awakened to truth, to awareness, to purpose. And now, as you stand here, stronger, wiser, more aware than you once believed possible, the meaning becomes clear. Your suffering did not come to destroy you. It came to reveal you. It came to shape you. It came to prepare you. And everything you endured was leading to this quiet, powerful realization: you were never broken, you were becoming.